The Indian side had dispatched one more company of troops from Srinagar over to Skardu, called the Biscuit Column. The objective of the Biscuit Column was to reinforce Skardu to support the defense of the town, and thereafter plan out offensive operations to repel the enemy away from Skardu. The Biscuit Column under Brigadier Fakir Singh were on track to reach Skardu by March 18, 1948. But the enemy, through their network of informers on the way, were aware of their arrival. They planned to intercept the Biscuit Column 32 kilometers south of Skardu and sent their men to lay an ambush on March 15, 1948. While the Biscuit Column was marching towards Skardu, they walked into the ambush. This was on March 17, 1948. They were brutally attacked by the enemy from all sides and lost 27 men, with 18 wounded and 7 missing. With such heavy losses to the Biscuit Column, they had to retreat from their positions back to safety in Srinagar. The crucial objective of Biscuit Column to reinforce Colonel Thapa's troops at Skardu was unsuccessful. The enemy, with their recent success, grew in confidence. They gathered more numbers from the local population and from Pakistan's northwest frontier province and attacked Skardu again with more ferocity on March 28, 1948. The fighting continued till March 30th. The Indian outposts at Skardu suffered major losses but were able to repel the attacks. The relentless enemy attacked again on April 7th, and the fighting continued for 3 days. Colonel Thapa requested air support to repel the attack, but the Royal Indian Air Force, already overstretched in supporting Poonch and Naushera, could not provide that support to the troops at Skardu. Colonel Thapa's troops repelled the enemy again with their sheer determination and grit. Srinagar, meanwhile, after the unfortunate failure of the Biscuit Column, sent the next reinforcement force to Skardu on April 1, 1948. The reinforcements, called the Sugar Column, were divided into 3 columns. First column, with 1 officer and 70 troops under Major Couts, departed for Kargil on April 1, 1948. The orders for them was to move to Parkata, close to Skardu, and set up a firm base of operations there. The second column, with 1 officer and 37 troops, 1 stage behind them, departed on April 3, 1948. This was under the command of Colonel Sampoorn Bachchan Singh, and the third column of 70 men under Colonel Kripal Singh was another stage behind them and departed from Srinagar on April 4, 1948. The orders for these columns was to set up Kargil as a base of operations into Skardu. April 11, 1948, the first column under Major Couts was ordered to move to Skardu. The way from Kargil to Skardu was filled with enemy strongholds and ambushes. April 17th, Major Couts' column was ambushed on the way by well-entrenched force. Major Couts' troops fought the enemy through these attacks for 4 days, but the enemy had outnumbered their column. Major Couts requested reinforcements and air support, and the second section of the column under Colonel S.B. Singh was sent forward on April 21st to support Major Couts to push through to Skardu. April 28th, Colonel S.B. Singh reached Major Couts with the objective of pushing through the enemy and reaching Skardu by April 29th. While this was happening, by April 30th, the column under Colonel Kripal Singh reached Kargil and moved forward to support the push through to Skardu. Now all 3 columns were fighting to push through the well-entrenched enemy over towards Skardu. Meanwhile, with limited troops and dwindling reserves, Colonel Thapa's defense of Skardu was getting more and more challenging. By April, Colonel Thapa had reported all his 3-inch mortar had been expended and the 2-inch mortar and rifle cartridges were also running short of supply. The progress to reinforce him was slower than expected. The Indian columns so far had created their bases in the towns along the Srinagar and Skardu line, and they left some troops to manage these bases and pushed their remaining strength forward towards Skardu. The towns that they had created bases were Sonmarg, Dras, and Kargil on the way. The Indian side now had enough strength in the south of Skardu, where it was clear to the enemy that they will be able to push through towards Skardu soon and reinforce the defense forces there. The commander of the enemy recognized this eventuality and planned out a daring and brilliant strategy. Instead of waiting for the Indian columns to attack south of Skardu, they decided to use alternate routes to go around the columns south of Skardu and attack the Indian bases behind those columns, thus cutting the Indian supply line from behind. The Indian line of communication ran parallel to the enemy-controlled areas for a long distance from Srinagar to Kargil. They moved their focus away from Skardu. Out of the total strength of 800, they left 200 well-entrenched troops to ambush any attempt by the Indian side to move forward. The remaining 600 moved from Skardu down south with the objective of attacking the line of communication from Srinagar to Kargil. They divided themselves into 3 columns, with 150 troops to attack the town of Sonmarg, 200 troops to attack Dras, and 250 troops to attack Kargil. This was a daring plan because they had reduced their strength at Skardu and covertly sent a majority of their strength to attack the communication line. The Indian side would still believe a bigger strength is present stopping them before Skardu and would be planning a major attack to push through, and the enemy would attack these 3 towns along the communication line. All the enemy needed was one victory in these 3 towns, and they would be successful in cutting off the Indian supply line to the high number of troops of the sugar column between Kargil and Skardu. The enemy had planned for all the attacks to go in on May 10th, 1948. The same day, the 200 troops blocking the Indian troops near Parkata retreated back towards Skardu, making the Indian columns pursue them towards Skardu away from Kargil. The attack went in and it was able to achieve surprise at all the 3 places. Column 1 and Column 2 attacks went in and were able to achieve surprise, but the defenders were quickly able to protect their positions and successfully push back the attack. The 3rd column attack at Kargil was unfortunately successful for the enemy. The enemy attacked the outskirts of Kargil, guarding the bridge at the Shingo River. All the Gurkha troops guarding that bridge lost their lives before they could even warn the base at Kargil of the attack coming in. With no prior warning, the enemy was able to surround Kargil from 3 fronts before mounting their attack. The defenders of Kargil, under such a massive and sudden attack, could not hold the defense and retreated back towards Leh. Kargil fell to the enemy in this attack. This was a huge setback for the Indian side. With Kargil captured by the enemy, the Indian side was in a very challenging position. The columns trying to push through to Skardu suddenly found themselves cut off from behind. The line of communication had faltered. With Kargil taken, the defense positions at Dras were also surrounded, and now the town of Leh, which was considered safe so far, was also threatened. And while all this was happening, the garrison at Skardu under Colonel Thapa was still fighting off the enemy from taking Skardu, with limited and tired troops and dwindling resources. The situation for the Indian side in this region was grave.